And while the people who are implicated from Eskom and Tegeta have yet to be called, the members of parliament for testimonies, here's a look at their earlier rebuttals in public on the charges. On the allegation that Eskom unduly made a repayment of 586 million rand to Tegeta, the letter says that the prepayments are not, or rather are the norm and not an aberration, and also given to other companies. Tegeta says Eskom was authorized to pay advance in order to secure coal supply, and that the Special Board Tender Committee had authorized the CFO to approve prepayments provided there is a discount in price. And on the charge that Eskom gave preferential treatment to Tegeta, Tegeta clarified, saying they followed due process and got the contract only after other suppliers backed out. And Tegeta says that they supplied coal at competitive prices and that Eskom had saved 3 billion rand by awarding the contract to Tegeta. And on the allegations that Tegeta was an unknown entity and didn't have the resources to purchase a big mine such as Optimum, Tegeta says that it has already been supplying coal to Eskom prior to the Optimum deal. And on the charge that Eskom forced the Glencore to put Optimum into business rescue, the power utility says it was Glencore, in fact, that put a gun to Eskom's head to renegotiate and agree to a costly 570 rand a ton contract. And finally, on the allegation that Eskom imposed the penalty of 2.1 billion rand on Optimum to put pressure on it, the power utility says the fine was necessary as Glencore was consistently supplying substandard coal. And joining us via Skype, George van der Merwe, Oak Bay Resources and Energy CEO, and Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, joining us in studio. Thank you so much. Let's start with you, Meneer van Wyk. In that, what do you make out of the proceedings in Parliament today?
Hi, Cindy. Sorry, I think, is that for me?
Yes.
It's van der Merwe, sorry.
Yes, Meneer van der Merwe.
There we go. Cindy, I briefly watched it today, the Parliament proceedings, and I think that if you see Piers Morrison on there, I think that the people definitely are not telling the whole side of the transaction that happened. But we must realize that Glencore is it's a big organization. They run by sound-minded professionals. I mean, Tegeta is also, it's not that big, but it's also an organization run by sound-minded professionals, and the transaction between them were willing, there's a willing buyer, willing seller. And I think at any time that we look at these proceedings. I mean, Glencore has never come and said, cried foul and said, look, that this transaction is not happy. They're not happy with the transaction. They were put under pressure. And, I think that we just need to follow the logic of it and see where it goes, the narrative. But it's just very strange that the people discussing it is everybody except the people that was involved in the transaction.
Well, the business practitioner did also make other allegations around the prepayment of 586 million rand to Tegeta, saying that it was unduly done so. So can you maybe break it down and tell us about the circumstances around the prepayment arrangement?
Yeah, you know what, they never alluded to that, when we took over the operations over there, the business rescue practitioners made Tegeta sign a PCF agreement, that we would be looking after all of their needs in case they ran short of funding. And in fact, that Tegeta had been purchasing coal from Optimum, which was on stock. We'd been purchasing from January. This wasn't alluded to. And I think that when we had sold all the coal that was on the mine, that was on stock, of course, there was an opportunity for more coal to be sold. And Tegeta, as a business person, saw this opportunity. But of course, Optimum, in the time Glencore was running it, was a very downscaled version of what it currently was, and could not produce what was needed to be sold if you wanted to sell additional capacity or additional coal to other vendors. And of course, to start up an operation like that in terms of the mining, I mean, we're talking about doubling the production that we needed to do, that it was currently doing, moving from 300 to 600,000 tons. I mean, that's quite a significant upscale, and that needed some money and to do it, and hence the reason why Tegeta made that decision to take the money.
All right, just please stay with us, Tsepo Khadima in studio. Of course, this has been a very juicy story in terms of how the acquisition of Optimum was then acquired by Oak Bay Group. But now we've heard in Parliament that the question was around the timing and the quantum there of being suspicious, but not necessarily being able to articulate or substantiate what the business practitioner was talking about.
The story has been juicy in the political sphere, but tragic in the economic sphere, because what we are seeing really playing out in Parliament now is nothing short of a kangaroo court, where there's no clarity as to whether or not this so-called inquiry is acquisitorial, meaning people are being accused, or is inquisitorial, where they are trying to gain understanding and more facts around what really transpired. And also the terms of reference have still not been clarified. There is no cross-examining of the people who are leading testimony of the witnesses. And you have a situation whereby people are having their heads shaved in their absence without any recourse. And in a constitutional democracy such as we have, I just cannot see how that can be morally acceptable. But what do we know? Let's ask about Glencore, which is a multinational company that is run by one Mr. Ivan Glasenberg, who worked at Eskom many years ago. And of course now it's a Swiss company. A Swiss company that controls more than 50% of the world's seaborne trade of coal. And a company that once it acquired Extrata, a South African coal mining company, with other resources, other minerals. It then controlled, it had almost a virtual monopoly at the Richards Bay coal terminal in terms of coal exports, and has not been able to invest in increasing capacity to be able to ensure that you can then fill up all the slots, but if anything has been there. But the question that the members of Parliament have failed to ask, and it's beyond me why they have not asked this question, is why have they not subpoenaed Glencore to come and testify, but testify specifically to the question, who put a gun to the head of the shareholder, being Glencore, shareholder of Optimum, that Optimum must be put into business rescue? Had Optimum not gone into business rescue, there would never have been a buyer. That's number one. Number two, the members of Parliament are making this assertion that there would have been other bidders, and the other bidder that they are advancing, which is Pembani, which is a related party, by the way. We have to bear in mind that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa's Shanduka Coal had a relationship with Glencore, and of course the Deputy President said that he has sold his shareholding or his business interests, he divested them into Pembani. So once again here, that conflict of interest, they are not asking any relevant questions about it. But above all, as I say, the economic benefit. Now we saw the banking institutions which ganged up against Oak Bay, and in the midst of this transaction, once the company is put into business rescue, it is the business rescue practitioners' sole judgment call as to who to sell to, based on making sure that they get the best deal for the thing. So, but Glencore had bought Optimum for 8 billion rand. So of course they will be aggrieved for having had to sell it for 2.1 billion, but they are the architects and the authors of their own misfortune for having put it into business rescue when they shouldn't have put it into business rescue. It's a gamble that backfired, and they have to live and die by that decision. But the same Glencore, by the way, when it acquired Extrata, a few years earlier, Extrata had acquired a mine called Eland Platinum on a farm called Elandsfontein JQ440. They paid 8.5 billion rand for 74% of that mine. That mine, shortly after its acquisition, and when Glencore acquired Extrata, it also went into care and maintenance, the platinum mine in Northwest near Brits, and that mine has since been sold. After they acquired it for 8.5 billion rand, it was sold, wait for it, for 150 million rand. And there hasn't been anyone who is complaining. So the questions that must be asked, whose interest actually is being advanced using the hallowed corridors of Parliament or chambers of Parliament to advance what is otherwise a sinister plot to tarnish the image of one business entrepreneur. And when the banks went against that, what were you to do? And also, Eskom, of course, had direct interest. If Eskom had not demanded that the acquisition must be viable, taking into account all other assets, the net results would have been the following. That mine would never have been sustainable. Eskom would not have been receiving coal at 150 rand a ton instead of the 450 that Glencore demanded. And the net result is we would have been back in the days where we were spending 1 billion rand on diesel, which was not even giving us the necessary power that we need, and putting Eskom further into more bigger problems. And they are not economically saying, what has been the balance and the judgment calls that were taken? How have they benefited the country? They've been cherry-picking in their accusations.
I know there's a lot of technical explanations, but I think the long and short of it all is what the Public Protector's report, of which most of these allegations are based, including media articles around the acquisition of Tegeta, that being suspicious, and why the prepayments, the timing, of course, the business practitioner today, Mr. Marsden, asking why in particular, when Glencore or Optimum was under business rescue, was Tegeta then afforded the 586 million rand prepayment. Can you just explain that to us, please, Mr. Van der Merwe?
Again, I mean, I think that, I have to, just take my hat off to my learned friend over there. He brought up some really valid points over there, specifically the part that, where is Glencore in this whole matter? I mean, I'm sure they can explain a lot. But, the funny thing is that, the business rescue practitioner, he was on the mine. He was there. He knew the state of the affairs. He knew that there was over 350 million creditors that needed to be paid. He knew that to start any operation or advance any operation or try and grow any operation, you must remember, Cindy, that a lot of these, they owed 350 million rand to the creditors. Nobody wanted to work for the operation. I mean, they had money that they already had, and I imagine that you still need to go and put in some more money now, to work for the company. So business relations was not there. So to get people to come and work, there was things that we had to settle debts. To get anybody to come to the mine, there was things like advance payments. So you didn't have the luxury of a normal operating business or operating environment. For the last 6 to 8 months, this business was under care and maintenance. Hence, there was the maintenance that was done. I mean, there was not a lot of money. Glencore made it very clear they don't have a lot of money to spend on it. All items was shut down and mothballed. So, all of these things had to come out and restarted and had to be, remade. So there was definitely money that was needed for this operation. And it's funny today when he was speaking, he didn't make mention of the fact that, he requested us for money to get her. And I mean, of course, we needed to supply it. That was our commitment to them.
Yeah, but it comes across as if there was preferential treatment and, of course, influences, as we've seen how, the matters came to a close with Eskom and the board and the Minister of Public Enterprises. But the question is, was Tegeta short of 600 million rand in acquiring or clinching this deal?
Look, when we talk about was Tegeta short of money, and let's talk about the preferential treatment. Let's put that. I want to deal with that matter first. So we forget the time period in which we were. You will remember that in December, Exxaro's agreement with Arnold Power Station had terminated, and at that stage, I think, if my memory serves me, they were buying coal at 1,100 rand a ton. That had terminated. So that power station was hungry for coal. It needed coal, and it could not get any more from that Exxaro mine. So it was in a situation where we are now, like Eskom, what they like to do is they like to stock up for winter. So they like to bring up their stocking level. So they go into a purchase mode. There were not many mines that could supply the coal around there. So they were in desperate need for coal, number one. So people forget about that situation that was created, the environment around that time. So if we want to talk about preferential treatment, about a prepayment, I think that we need to understand the circumstances that we are in. And I'm not saying it's something that Eskom does all the time. However, we know that Eskom does do prepayments. I mean, they've admitted to doing the prepayments already. Now, if you want to talk about was to get a short of money to buy the transaction, I'm not going to say that to get a short of money. No, like any financial or any business house, you know, we tend to keep our cash and use our cash for different things. And of course, we're always looking for cash. I mean, any business guy is looking for money to be able to turn the money around. And of course, we went and looked at all the banks to see who can supply us finance and at what price. What is the cheapest price that we can get it at? And of course, we use that to capitalize. And knowing that we have a liability, which we have already went to the business practitioner and we told him that, we will fund any requirements you need. So was it specific for the transaction? Was it specific for capital? Was it specific for the creditors that needed to be paid at the mine? You know, I think that we are, what I want to say is that Tegeta always is looking for money to expand their businesses and looking for the easiest and the cheapest way to get those resources. But if you want to tell me it's specific for a certain or earmarked for
all right, just stay with us. Your line is breaking up, but in the interest of business, you know, you're always told that you must make money using other people's money in order to then leverage on that to run your operations. The question around Eskom reducing the 2 billion rand fine that Optimum owed to only 600 rand when Tegeta acquired Optimum Coal, explaining the circumstances around that, as Mr. Mafanameva alluded to. Is this in the normal course of operations in these kind of transactions?
No, the 2.1 billion rand, which was a fine based on poor quality coal that had been supplied by none other than Glencore into Eskom. And as per the agreement that Glencore, through Optimum, had with Eskom, there were penalty provisions. So there was nothing untoward with that fine. And in fact, Mr. Molefe was duty bound. It was his fiduciary duty to demand that fine. However, we have to bear in mind is this, that effectively was a dispute which was provided for that it had to be resolved through an alternative resolution mechanism being arbitration. So the arbitrator in the end, whose decision was final, is the one who determined that is 600 million rand, not 2.1 billion rand. So I can see how Eskom or Tegeta or Oak Bay, actually what they have to come in, because the agreement specifically provided for alternative dispute resolution mechanism of arbitration, and that is the arbitrator's call. But on the 587 or 86 million rand that was paid on the day and all of that, we have to now bear this in mind. The biggest risk for Eskom was not to receive coal, therefore, economy of this country, the knock-on effect would have been much more devastating, not just on Eskom as an enterprise, but on the economy of this country if we had that power station or the two power stations which Eskom was to receive coal from could not, that coal mine could not continue to supply. So for them, it was a prudent decision, and also in the benefit of time, we now know that the 86 million rand of prepayment, all of that coal has since all been delivered to Eskom. So the question that must be asked, if Eskom prepaid to receive coal in return, and all of that coal has since been delivered, exactly what harm has been suffered by the state or by Eskom? No one has been able to adduce any evidence to that effect, except also the banks. Why did this consortium of banks, in the last minute, when they would have known fully that the purchaser, being Oak Bay, had about 1.6 billion rand and was now seeking credit facilities from the banks, and the same banks, by the way, advance loans to all the mining companies? Why did they, in this case, not advance mining companies? And those are the questions that need to be asked, because we have banking institutions that have become politicians, and their decision on that day, the 11th of April, as they say, where they refused to allow the 600 million rand to be paid off at a later stage, that is a question that must be attacked, because the risk then, therefore, is it would have devastated not just the sale falling through, but also the economy of this country, because Eskom now all of a sudden would have been left in limbo where it could not secure the coal it so much needed, and the lights would have been off on the eve of winter. In April, just before we went into winter, when we need much more. And last winter, 2016, we had no load shedding. So we all are thankful because there was an Oak Bay, that transaction was done and coal was being supplied, not just by them, but all others, but the operations, and then there was a 3 billion rand saving. All of this has to be put in balance. But as I say, the kangaroo court, it needs to be rescued. For as long as you got witnesses you cannot cross-examine, the terms of reference are not clarified, and at the same time they are cherry-picking in terms of people who lead testimony in order to come to an outcome, a predicated outcome. That is what is egregious about this current inquiry as it stands, and that is an abuse of power by our parliamentarians, and they need to be told they need to stop. The Constitution does not allow them to abuse their position of power and privilege as they do. If they are to seek questions, by all account, we all want to know what went wrong, and if anyone has to be prosecuted, by all account.
Yeah,
but
and I think that's the point I want to pick up on, in the sense that, has there been any formal charges laid? We heard with the business rescue practitioner saying that in 2016 he had approached the Hawks and nothing came out of it. And secondly, why is there no representation in the parliamentary inquiry of Tegeta, Glencore? In your view, Mr. Van der Merwe, do you think that this is a fair hearing in your view?
Cindy, I just want to go back to one point quickly, just on the penalties, and then I'll move on to your point. I just want to, and I'm going to spend 10 seconds on it. I just want to tell you that Glencore was so confident that they would win this penalty saga that they never even provisioned for it. And in fact, they were able to even manage their auditors, Deloitte, in their their balance sheet on the 31st of December. They never even provisioned it. And of course, the business rescue practitioner was involved in this process, and he also never told them to provision it in their books. And this is how confident they were that they would definitely win this penalty battle. Right. So just moving on to the fairness of this proceedings that's happening. And I think my learned friend, he said something very crucial to the matter. It is very funny that we have a lot of, I want to call them stakeholders, that are involved in in this questioning. But when the other people are around, I mean, when we have Tegeta, we have Glencore, we have Eskom, we have all these people around. Why are we are engaging stakeholders to, and they are using information which comes from the media. I mean, they were not present at the time. They don't know what led to the exact decisions that was taken, why things were done. So I must admit that I feel that there's definitely an alternative agenda. They are having.
Yeah, but you would think that at some point there must have been an engagement between the material stakeholders with regards to the purchase of Tegeta, not just in the media space or even the erstwhile Public Protector's State of Capture report. What, in your view, has Tegeta or Oak Bay done to satisfy those niggling questions around the legalities and whether there was any untoward behavior on the part of either party?
They always have the statement, asked and answered. And I mean, I'm just going to go back to the matter with Treasury and, of course, the bad quality which they kept on bringing out the report. I mean, I remember that report coming to me in its same form with just different things, small things changed more than 10 times, and I answered every single one of them exactly the same way. But it is as if whatever we answer, no matter what we answer, there's an agenda. So we have everybody that has asked us, we have answered. In the state capture report, they have asked us, we have answered all the questions, and to the best of our ability. However, none of these seem to come to the ground or to the forefront, because this is not the agenda. So, but we are always willing to work with anybody, and anybody that has any questions, we always are there to address them, because we were there. We understand. We know what went wrong. We know what happened.
Look, I mean, I'm puzzled that the members of parliament should have been fully aware that the so-called state of capture report, which is effectively a document, is before courts as we speak. So I don't know how they can rely on it. But also, it is common cause that on the day before the report was released, and we don't know why the report had to be released at the time, ESCOM delivered evidential material. I think they had something like 96 or 106 boxes of evidential material to rebut all the allegations that had been leveled against them. And that evidential material does not even get a mention in the so-called report. And hence I'm saying that it is nothing but a document, because as has been argued in court, and the word that has been used as peremptory in terms of the Public Protectors Act, that you cannot have a remedial action without a finding. There can be no finding without an investigation that is complete. And hence, even that report, the so-called report, does not even have the word findings. It's got things called observations, which are an invention of the former Public Protector, Thuli Madonsela. So why on earth would the members of parliament then place any weight on that document, knowing full well its shortcomings, more so that crucial evidential material, more than 45% of the document is dedicated to ESCOM, but the crucial evidential material has never been considered, is not included therein, and yet they are wanting now to use it. So what we are taking issue with here, if they want to do their job so that we can have a trust of their bona fides, and that the process has got integrity, they need to conduct themselves better than what currently they are doing, because right now they've not covered themselves in any glory whatsoever.
Mr. Van der Merwe, if Ukbe feels so aggrieved in that there wasn't representation and that you have given as much as possible in getting clarity, can you impose yourself in this process? And your observation, do you feel that this ESCOM inquiry in Parliament is one-sided?
Cindy, you know, I want to go back to my statement to say that, you know, we can do anything. There's no problem with it. And I mean, we've made ourselves available for any you know, audit or any court or any process. However, again, I'm going to say that we must understand that there's a different agenda here. And I think that making myself available, or anybody of the team available to answer any questions, we are always available for that. However, I'm not sure at this current stage if that will make any change, because I mean, a credible organization like ESCOM delivering you know, all the answers to the people who are doing investigations, they don't get considered. I mean, ourselves delivering to the Treasury various documents when they answer questions, they don't get considered. So I just feel that currently the process in which we are going, I mean, they will just start another inquiry of another nature. And I think that we want to go to a place that, you know, where it is sustainable, where you can be heard, there's a court, or you know, where you know, you get a fair chance and a fair space to participate in, and people actually hear and listen to you and then make a decision. And like my learned friend said, that if there's somebody wrongdoing or if there's evidence of wrongdoing, let us charge them, and you know, let's go that way.
Okay, George, you still haven't answered the question whether you think the entire process is one-sided.
You know, I did answer it. I don't think I answered it as direct as you wanted it to be done. But I do, you know, if you had to ask me, I'd say that I think there are a lot of key people, direct stakeholders that are missing from this process. And if that is going to be the case, then you would never be able to find out exactly really what go on. And anything that is said would be based on speculation or based on hearsay, based on a third party, based on what you read in the newspaper. And it'll always be based on those. If you don't have the people actually involved in the transaction there to ask what was the circumstances around making those key decisions.
All right, and Mr. Hadima, what would then be the objective if having an inquiry and not all key role players are present, to get to the root or both sides of the story and a more balanced view?
In fact, a duty is imposed upon the lawmakers to ensure that audi alteram partem, which is sacrosanct in our constitutional scheme, that it is, you know, not only spoken of, but it is actually seen to be done. Therefore, what am I saying? You cannot shave people's head in their absence. If there is anybody that you are accusing of anything, if there's any evidence that is adversely led against any one person, that person has a right of reply. What was the criteria followed in selecting these witnesses to lead testimony that they did, which at the end of the day, that testimony cannot stand in any court of law, is bound to fail. So the question is, knowing already the weaknesses and the irregularities in the process, hence I'm calling it a kangaroo court, knowing full well or having appreciated fully the irregularities and the weaknesses, how can they still want to hold course in continuing with it without first and foremost sitting back and saying, we have made an error, we therefore want to correct that error. Let us not infringe upon the constitutional rights of citizens, because that is what the Constitution demands. So what we are saying is that Parliament needs to lead by example. After all, they are lawmakers and they should have a better appreciation and lead by example. Right now they are not. And that is a tragedy of immense proportions. But long story short, if there is any wrongdoing, by all accounts, because there are other instances, by the way, where ESCOM has been robbed blind, where they have made prepayments. In other instances, they have paid for coal that didn't, not even a wheelbarrow was delivered, but they spent 8.1 billion rand. How can our members of parliament believe that is normal? Not one wheelbarrow delivered, but 8.1 billion rand paid to one company, and they've never once subpoenaed that company to answer. They've never once demanded that ESCOM must take corrective action. We are buying diesel, 1 billion rand a month, and that diesel contract itself, there is something egregious in terms of the players in it and the circumstances that led into them getting it. We're not getting the power that we so much need for this economy. We're spending 4.50 cents a kilowatt hour when the same kilowatt hour was being sold for 96 cents or thereabout, and the members of parliament believe that is normal. But in this one instance, where savings can be demonstrated, and that in fact the judgment call that was taken by the then management, which secured reliable supply of coal at the low cost into ESCOM, which is what ESCOM needs, happened, and yet they are punishing. So every good deed will not go unpunished.
As you say, yeah, no, I will certainly attribute to that saying to you, Tsepo, but as always, thank you so much for your insight. And George van der Merwe is Optimum CEO, joining us via Skype, and Tsepo Khadima, political analyst. And thanks indeed for joining us. Of course, this follows the inquiry into ESCOM in the proceedings in Parliament today, where the business rescue practitioner, Mr. Marsden, deposed, and he was talking about the timing and the quantum of the transaction being suspicious. When he was pinned to answer questions around, hypothetically speaking, was the former CEO involved in pressuring ESCOM, of course, he declined to comment. It's a very interesting one that we'll stick to and give you the latest updates as it develops.